So I'm going to share with you the most common problem, hidden problem that I have found with business owners who are podcasting, and I'll share with you how you can fix it right now.
Struggling to grow your podcast or turn your content into real revenue? You're not alone. So many creators pour their hearts into their shows only to feel stuck, spinning their wheels without seeing the downloads, the engagement, or income they dreamt of. Now, imagine a podcast that doesn't just grow, but thrives, a show that builds your authority, attracts high-value clients, and becomes a lead-generating machine. That's exactly what today's guest, Kevin Chemidlin, has. So we have Kevin Chemidlin today, founder of Grow the Show, and I am so excited for our conversation, and I know our listeners are going to derive so much value today, Kevin. Welcome to the show.
Larry, thanks so much for having me. So excited to dive in.
So listen, we're going to spend a lot of time on what you're doing today with Grow the Show, but so our listeners can understand your background because they are fascinated with the entrepreneurial journey. Can you share with them who you are, what led you up to the point of founding Grow the Show?
Yeah, so we just got done talking before we hit record about our ties to Philadelphia. So I am from the city of Philadelphia, and I originally started my career as a software developer at a big health insurance company. I was not super passionate about software or health insurance. Nonetheless, did it for 4 years. And I constantly had all these different side hustles because I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I tried like 3 or 4 of them. They failed miserably. I tried a lockbox for package delivery, but didn't know anything about products. I tried a social media app. It was geolocated digital piñatas. Believe it or not, that didn't work. And then I even tried a couple other ones until eventually I kind of gave up on side hustles. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to do something that's interesting that I want to do in my spare time. And I launched a podcast. This was in 2018. And I launched the podcast about my hometown, Philadelphia. Well, I discovered that I was way better at podcasting than all the other things that I had tried. And the show pretty quickly got attention. And I had my finger on the trigger of leaving the corporate job for a long time. I was ready to go. I had tons of savings. So I took the leap and really early on went full-time into podcasting. Well, what I learned was that I didn't actually know as much about how to grow an audience, how to monetize a podcast, or how to, run an online business as I thought. So within 6 months of leaving the corporate job, I was in really rough shape. My show hadn't grown. I was out of savings. And in fact, I was going into debt. I don't advise leaving the job as early as I did. And my back was against the wall. And I actually had my phone out and was about to call my previous boss to ask for my job back. The problem was I had made such a big stink publicly that I was this entrepreneur and like corporate life isn't for me, that I was like, I can't do this just yet. So I actually put my podcast on hold, did a bunch of studying, took some courses, read a bunch of books, spent a weekend walking around Philly, listening to every single podcast on the top 100 charts just to understand what are they doing differently, how are they monetized, those types of things. And when I learned a bunch of stuff. I learned how successful shows are actually growing and monetizing. And B, I learned that all the stuff that I was doing was stuff that I thought you had to do to grow and monetize a podcast. It's stuff that like everyone on the internet says to do in order to grow and monetize a podcast, but none of that stuff worked. And I was like, oh, it's not me that's wrong. It's all these things that all these people are doing that's wrong. And what I discovered was that it's very easy to launch a podcast. And so anyone who launches a podcast feels qualified to give advice on podcasting and how to grow a podcast. So the vast majority of podcast advice out there is from people who have not actually grown and monetized the show significantly. So everyone's kind of monkey see, monkey doing the same stuff, and it doesn't work. And then everyone thinks that they are the problem. So once I was like, oh, there's a way to do this, I brought Philly Who back. And within about a year, got it past 6 figures, both in revenue and in downloads. And that kicked off sort of my incumbency as a podcast guy. I did Philly Who full-time for 2 years. And then in 2020, I launched Grow the Show to help other podcasters figure out what I had figured out. And in the 5 years since then, the company has very much evolved for me to specialize with online entrepreneurs. So folks that are using podcasting as a way to grow their business. So that's the 5-minute, super speed journey of how I got to where I am today. Certainly learned a bunch of lessons, both about podcasting, but also now about how podcasting relates to business growth.
Yeah, sounds like some great lessons, and the
Ugh.
fact that you took them, incorporated them, and just got better is, what the entrepreneurial journey is all about. And one of the things you talked about just a few moments ago is, you talked about your role in healthcare as a software developer, and one of the things you said was, after 4 years in the corporate world, I learned that corporate life isn't for me, and that was one of the reasons why, I guess, right there was that you couldn't end up going back in that moment. At what moment did you realize or come to realize that you wanted to build something? When did that epiphany take place for you?
Well, it actually happened in college when I kind of did build something. So when I started college at Temple University in 2010, there were two a cappella groups. There was an all-male group and an all-female group. And that was like 2010, a cappella music had this really weird moment in like US pop culture where there was Glee on TV. There was a show called The Sing Off on TV. Like the Pentatonics became really big. So like the movie Pitch Perfect came out. So like a cappella kind of had this moment. And that was right when I was in college. Now it's back to what it was before, where it was like kind of this nerdy niche thing, but it had a moment. So I was super, super into it. And when I got to college, I helped co-found a co-ed a cappella group, and over the 4 years, like became a leader in the group, and was essentially the CEO of the group. 2 years after I left, they placed 5th in the world, and so like we accomplished a lot from zero to that in just
Sure.
6 years. So once I got out of that and I became the lowest rung of the ladder at a huge Fortune, at the time, Fortune 100, but now probably Fortune 20 company, I wasn't building anything at that point. So I actually stumbled into building something just by being so interested in a cappella music. And then it got taken away by graduating, and I suddenly wasn't building anything anymore. And boy, did that create this massive void. So I think that's why I did the 9 to 5 during the day, because I was raised to understand that, you want to go for security and you want to go for, a high salary and stuff like that. And I won that game, but I still just had this massive itch to continue to build something and work with people. And if I'm being honest, be in charge of something, which I wasn't doing at work. And so, like I said, I tried all these different things until podcasting eventually became this weird combination of the human voice, a cappella music, and technology. So that was the thing that clicked.
Well, you are the first person that has told us that their start was really, as a result of a cappella music. So
I might be the only one.
you definitely have that claim to fame on our show. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
and, listen, I graduated quite a long time before 2010, and we had an a cappella group at our university. I went to Binghamton, and they were pretty widely regarded, pretty interesting, and they go all over the country still as a group and perform. So. It's kind of an interesting skill set that I cannot do. So I appreciate it anyway. So, there was another company that you talked about. You talk about hearing the story of Warby Parker on a podcast, and it really inspired you to launch your first podcast interviewing successful Philadelphians, right? Can you tell us a little bit about how that story impacted you?
Oh, absolutely. I would not be here today with you if not for that specific podcast episode. So it's an episode of the show called How I Built This with Guy Raz. If you're hearing my voice now, you're interested in podcasts that serve entrepreneurs. And so there's a good chance you've heard about How I Built This with Guy Raz. If you haven't, definitely check it out. It's amazing. It's like an OG in the business podcast space. So, what got me into podcasting in the first place was I discovered this show. It was 2017. I wasn't a podcast listener before that, and I became obsessed because I had never heard the stories. It was basically a show that made really cinematic audio storytelling case studies of successful companies and movements. And I had never been exposed to that sort of thing before. And I had never really been exposed to like personal development or any of those types of things before listening to podcasts. So there was one morning in December of 2017, I'll never forget it. I lived in North Philadelphia and I was taking the subway into Center City where my job was. And I was, super over caffeinated, just sitting on the subway, like buzzing, jittering, but listening to a podcast. And it told the story of Warby Parker. Now I literally had worn Warby Parker glasses earlier that morning. I wear contacts, but like in the morning, I walk around with glasses. But I did not know that company was founded in Philly. So I heard this story of this company that was founded literally above my head while I'm on the subway. And it was electric to me. I was so inspired. And I was like, I did not know that incredible companies like this could be started here. And so I was like, I need to hear more stories like this. So I looked around, and specifically, I needed to hear more Philly stories like that. How I Built This gave me plenty of successful entrepreneur stories, but I wanted to hear one specifically about Philly. So I looked around the podcasting app, I searched around, and there were some shows that like kind of interviewed movers and shakers here and there, but they were really like, they were not heavily edited. They were just like kind of fast and loose. But what I wanted was that How I Built This style, cinematic, like with voiceovers, and it was almost like an audio documentary. So that's when I was like, it had been probably 4 or 5 months since my last failed side hustle. So I was ready to start another one. And I was like, why don't I give this a try? And I mean, as I say, the rest is history.
There you go. Did you have GoPuff on your show?
I did not. I was in talks with GoPuff.
Okay.
They were very busy doing tons of expansion in 2019, like tons of expansion. And then once COVID hit in 2020, like everything just got thrown into the air. But I was in conversations with their head of revenue, and then that never happened.
They're a Drexel alum. That's why we know about them, because my son, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, he goes to Drexel and has told us that before. Imagine a relationship where financial conversations don't feel stressful, but actually bring you joy. We've designed a guide to help you have positive, meaningful money conversations with your partner. This isn't just another budgeting tool. It's a roadmap for building trust and connection. So if you're ready to start a joyful money journey with your partner, go to Chemidlin.us/couplesjoy and download your free guide. Transform your financial future together, starting today. One of the things you said earlier, which was interesting, and you shared it really up front about the fact that, you put your show on pause for a while to kind of go through that learning experience that you had to, absorb more information. And, I find it incredibly fascinating that, it sounds like a lot of your mentorship and learning through this process has also come from, the same medium that you're on, which is podcasting. And I think that gets lost on a lot of people, that you could get so much learning and mentorship from this medium that it's great in that way, right? But one of the things that, we hear creators being told all the time is that you don't want to necessarily put a pause on your show. You did it. And when you came back, it was a financial success for you. What insights did you gain specifically during that break that allowed you to take what's ordinarily told as like taboo, because you're going to tank your show, and really come out the other end in a way that you blew your show up in a fantastic way, both from listenership and financially?
Yeah, Larry, one of the best questions ever to have been asked, because this is the crux of podcasting. And what you just touched upon is one of those misconceptions that folks have, which is that above all else, do not break the mighty consistency rule. It is hammered into the skull of every new creator, regardless of platform, but also especially with podcasters. And it is true that consistency is a key component of success. But when I put the show on hold, I had been consistent for over a year, and the show had not grown. And now, 5-8 years later, I've spoken with podcasters who have been consistent for more than 20 years and whose show has not grown. So if consistency were the key, then by definition, those who have been consistent the longest will have had the biggest shows. But that is absolutely not the case. There are shows that have been around for a month that are way bigger than shows that have been around for 20 years. So obviously, consistency can't be the only thing. Well, what I learned by breaking the almighty consistency rule is that consistency is important, but consistency alone is not enough. If your show is not consistent, it is probably not going to grow. But if your show is only consistent, it's also not going to grow. So it could be the reason that it's not growing, but it's not going to be the reason that it grows, if that makes sense.
Right.
This is true particularly with podcasting, and this is one of the nuances that I learned by putting the show on hold so that I can have some freaking space to think and to learn, is that the audio podcasting medium is one that does not have an algorithm attached to it. If you're a YouTuber, you have an algorithm. If you're on any social media platform, you have an algorithm. Audio podcasting does not. So you could be putting literally the greatest podcast episodes that have ever been heard by human ears on your podcast feed every single week. But if you are not also utilizing a marketing tactic that works, nobody will hear that show. And then you will be that person who 3 years later is like, what the heck? I've published every week for 3 years and the show I think is very good. Why hasn't it grown? And it's like, you might be making the best episodes ever, but that is why. So that was one of the biggest lessons, probably the most important lesson that I learned in that period, is that consistency is important. And the reason it is good advice for an early creator is because it's really good to build the habit of consistency and publishing no matter what. But you also must learn a marketing tactic for your show if you want it to grow.
Yeah. So what you're really saying is, you don't want to go along the old adage of doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result and, going insane, so to speak. Right. So if you're not getting those responses or what your expectations are from the show, and you were being consistent, it's okay to kind of take a break, regroup, see what you might be able to fix, change, or improve, develop, or change to make it better. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. One thing that I learned in my software time was a framework called Agile Development. And the framework basically means you're just like moving really fast and making iterations and changing things, making small changes fairly quickly. That is how I recommend any creator go about doing this. So you need to be consistent, but you also need to be measuring things and making slight adjustments until you start to see success. But continuing to do the same thing without changing anything over and over and over again for a year, of course, it's not going to work.
So you had, Philly Who, which you had a very localized show where you were interviewing, people who've created, built businesses in the Philly area. How did you leverage what you learned from that show to grow the show podcast and move into that to help develop other podcasters develop their show in a way that worked, ideally for them?
Yeah. So what's funny about that is the way that happened was it was early 2020, COVID happened. And as soon as COVID happened, my Philly show had to go on hold. It was forced to get paused because all of my guests canceled because they were all leading their organizations through the crisis. And it just became a weird time to have a 60-minute retrospective storytelling session. So my show went on hold. And I kind of was, I had a couple of consulting gigs that brought me some extra income, and that was enough for me to get by during quarantine. And so I just had a bunch of podcasters who had heard of Philly who I'd come across at conferences or whatever, reaching out, asking, how did you grow and monetize? How did you grow and monetize? How did you grow and monetize? And by the 30th Zoom call where I was explaining things, I was like, man, I'm really repeating myself here. And man, there seem to be a lot of podcasters who need this type of help. So it was with that, I was like, what if I created something that could help podcasters grow and monetize? And so I started thinking about that and, kind of started taking some action on it. growtheshow.com was available. So I was like, awesome, that's it. And then what's funny about that is I launched this business without a podcast. So it was just a coaching product, essentially a course with some coaching. It was meant to be an educational program. And I originally offered it to people who already knew who I was. So I said, on social media, I said, hey, everybody, I've achieved XYZ with Philly Who. I'm now launching a program to help other podcasters do the same. If you're interested, book a call with me here. People booked a call. People bought it. I was like, whoa, this is amazing. This is what I'm going to do for the next X amount of years. So what's funny about that is I initially got a bunch of sales to the coaching program, but then after all the people who knew me already heard about it and decided whether or not to do it, then I didn't make any sales for 3 or 4 months. And I was doing I didn't know how to market a coaching program or an online business. And so I was doing outbound emailing. I was doing outbound LinkedIn DMing. I was trying all these different things to get clients to my coaching program. And for a long time, it didn't work. And it was brutal. The summer of 2020 was horrible. I was getting on 8 to 12 discovery calls per day. They were all telling me to pound sand. And I got so stressed that I was tested for sleep apnea. And my doctor was like, I was like, I think you're stressed. And I'm like, no, I'm not stressed. I have sleep apnea. And I was stressed. So, but what's funny is in October of 2020, after like 4 or 5 months of struggle, my girlfriend said, why don't you launch a podcast about this? Like in retrospect, it's like, duh. But I was like, oh, maybe. So, 6 months after launching Grow the Show, launched the Grow the Show podcast and used how I told stories on Philly Who to tell stories of successful podcasters. It was heavily produced. There was a lot of voiceover, that sort of thing. And once that happened, oh my gosh, that's when everything changed for Grow the Show, because then podcasters could hear this show, number one, and be like, wow, this is really good. And this guy knows what he's talking about. But also, I knew how to grow a podcast. So I just did that. And then people listened to the podcast and then bought the coaching. So my goodness, how I wish I could have skipped that summer of pain and, skipped right to the good part. But yeah, that's how Philly Who very much informed the launch of Grow the Show.
Well, if you skip that, you wouldn't be as grateful for that opportunity.
1,000%.
And you basically turned the show into that sales army for you. So you didn't have to go on the 12 Zooms a day and do that. The show's doing that for you. So let's talk about this, because, you're educating business owners in a lot of cases, entrepreneurs, people who are looking to derive or drive value from a podcast. What do you wish that more business owners knew about podcasting?
Yeah. I wish that they knew that a podcast is more middle of funnel than it is top of funnel. So a lot of business owners launch a podcast thinking that it's going to bring them leads. But a podcast, especially in the early days, is actually not a great lead generation mechanism, but it is an undefeated lead nurturing mechanism. Right, so lead generation is the moment that somebody finds out about you, and technically it's when they give you their contact information. Lead nurturing is when someone who already knows who you are spends more time with you and gets to know you better. A podcast, as I said, in my opinion, is absolutely undefeated at that, because when someone listens to your podcast on a regular basis, they're spending an hour on average with you per week, which is just so much time. There are multiple studies that say that buyers need to spend about, on average, 7 hours with your brand before they'll make a buying decision. So there's no better way and more efficient way, in my opinion, than a podcast to make that happen. But the misconception comes into play when business owners launch a show. And again, they think it's going to be a lead generation mechanism. So they put the episodes out there and nobody hears it. And they're like, what the heck? This show is doing nothing for me. It's not bringing me any new leads. Now, many of the people who were already leads are listening to the show and buying, right? And business owners who have a podcast most of the time, many times experience their best customers get on a sales call and they're like, oh, I can't believe I'm getting to talk to you right now. This is so cool. And it's like, okay, that person has been nurtured like crazy thanks to your podcast. They're much more likely to buy. But the podcast really becomes a source of jet fuel for a business when you attach it to a lead generation mechanism, a separate way to get people to find out about you for the first time. And then you redirect those leads to the podcast. That is the magic formula.
I think that's great advice. And definitely we've seen that in action here with our firm, and certainly is. We just talked about, what business owners, we hope they knew about podcasting, but what about those that are already podcasting already? What would you like to share with them about how they could potentially, maybe one or two kind of easy implementable ideas that they could take and utilize and help get their show to the next level?
Totally. So I'm going to share with you the most common problem, hidden problem, that I have found with business owners who are podcasting, and I'll share with you how you can fix it right now. So most business owners with podcasts, almost all of them, think that they have a growth problem. They think, I need a better growth strategy. When in reality, most of the time, what they actually have is a retention problem. They think that no new people are discovering their show because they look at their metrics and they're like, wow, my podcast gets 150 downloads a week, and it's been the same for a year. So my podcast has had the same 150 people listening for a year. That's actually, in most cases, not true. Usually it's different 150 people every week, but they don't come back next week. So it's like your podcast, like trying to grow that podcast, one that has a retention problem, is like trying to fill a wicker basket with water. And you're like, what the heck? This basket won't fill. You know what? Let me try a fire hose, right? No, we don't need a better hose. We need instead to try to fill this steel bucket with water, and maybe the same hose will do the job. So here's how you convert your podcast from a wicker basket to a steel bucket. It has first of all, if you want to know if you have this problem, the number one metric to look at is called completion rate. It is called completion rate. And that can be found not in your analytics of your host platform. So this is wherever you upload, your episodes, Libsyn or Buzzsprout or Spreaker or Transistor. There's a million of them. That platform doesn't have your retention metrics. It only has downloads. Downloads only tells you if a device downloaded the show. It doesn't tell you how much of the episode people listened to. If you want that information, you have to go to either Apple Podcasts Analytics Dashboard or Spotify's Analytics Dashboard. I, at this point in time, recommend going to Apple's because most podcasters have more listeners on Apple than Spotify, and so it gives you more rich data. And so when you go into the Apple Podcasts Analytic Dashboard, you can look at individual episode metrics, and they will literally show you a graph of every single listener and when they stopped listening to your episode. It is illuminating. And so that's the first thing I check with any business owner that I'm talking to with your podcast. I said, what is your average completion rate? And they almost always say, what is that? How do I check that? And I say, go look. And if you have an interview show, if your completion rates are below 65%, you have a retention problem. If your shows are solo episodes and it's below 75%, you have a retention problem. The number one way to fix retention is your intros. So the number one reason listeners turn your episode off is because when they turned it on, they weren't yet 100% sold that they want to spend the next 30 to 60 minutes of their time with you with this specific topic. So the first thing that must happen when a listener presses play, the first thing they must hear is your voice telling them what they're about to get out of this episode. I say, hook them immediately. And I really like to use the Pain Vision Solution copywriting framework. So I might say, like if I was introducing this episode, are you an entrepreneur who has tried podcasting, but you just can't get your podcast to grow? Well, what if instead, spending less time per week, your show was growing month over month by 5 to 10%? Well, in this episode, I'm going to interview Kevin Chemidlin, who is a podcast expert, and he's going to share with you the secret misconception that is holding your show back. Let's get to it. That episode, just with that little 30-second intro that teed up the conversation that we're having right now, will perform almost double better than if when someone presses play on this episode, they hear dee 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 dee. Welcome to the, like, they're already gone. They don't know what they've already turned the show off. So that's the number one secret that I wish every business owner knew.
Great stuff. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things I know you're very into are systems, right? And why do you think systems are so important for business owners to understand as they grow?
Well, I mean, I was lucky enough to learn systems when I got a degree in software, because that's what software is. It's systems.
Right.
And when developing software, what you learn is a computer. Well, this actually isn't true anymore with AI, but back in that day, a computer is just going to do what you tell it to do. And so in order to make software work really well, you have to define, I want you to do this thing at when X happens, I need you to do Y. And here's exactly how to do Y every single time. And when you do Y, X should be the output. Business is the same thing. It is literally nothing but what is the trigger? So when should this thing happen? What are the inputs? What is the process? What should happen every single time? And then what are the outputs of this process? And I mean, to this day, I'm still not perfect at developing systems because I like to do everything myself. And it's sometimes a pain in the neck to set them up. But my goodness, when you are able to unlock systems, it just gives you leverage. It gives you time back, and it gives you the ability to serve multiple people at scale. So it really is the basis to everything. And spoiler alert, the same thing is true with a podcast. I just gave you a system for literally doubling your completion rate every single episode by using that simple framework of an intro.
Right. Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm a big systems person as well. I think it's, especially as you grow and scale, they become increasingly more important and vital to the business. So, as someone myself, I've gotten so many intangibles from podcasting. what is the best thing that podcasting has brought into your life?
Well, I always say there is no better networking tool on the planet because it's a little bit more difficult now than it was, 8 years ago when I started. But it's still true that a podcast gives you an excuse to get an hour on the calendar with virtually anybody. And like it bakes into your weekly life, learning from incredible people. And if you were to just like try to book an hour with some of the people who would say yes today to a podcast with you, they would not say yes. They would, deflect you to an assistant who will tell you no or string you on or whatever, or they might even ignore the request if you just said, hey, can I have an hour of your time? But if instead you say, hey, I have a podcast where I am serving a specific listener base and helping them do X, Y, or Z, and I'd love to have you on the show to talk about Q, then you would just be floored at the caliber of people who would be like, absolutely, I would love to do that. And so you as the host are doing this in service of your audience, which is number one. But my goodness, do you get an incredible network? And the way that I learned the power of that was when I did the Philly show. And in 2019, again, I was this kid who was 4 years into a software career. And suddenly, as if overnight, I was walking into restaurants having a seat and like they were bringing over dishes, compliments of the chef. And I'm like, what the heck? This is crazy. And I'm like hanging out with some of the biggest and most well-renowned business leaders in Philadelphia just because I launched this podcast. I hadn't achieved anything by all accounts. There was no reason for them to be spending that time with me, but I was providing a service to them and to my listener base. And it just created an unstoppable network. So sometimes when I'm talking to business owners who are considering it is I'm like, if all this did was give you an absolute world-class network and it only took you an hour a week, would it be worth it? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, rock and roll.
Yeah, listen, that network's brought me a lot of joy personally. And quite frankly, it's created, or we've been able to create using our guests, a library of information for the families that we already serve. So if they haven't listened to the show yet or missed an episode and there was a specific pain point that they had that we've talked about, and maybe they've been a little delinquent in, putting into motion, sometimes we'll just send them a simple episode of another guest that talked about that same topic, because sometimes just hearing that from another voice may get them to make the moves and do what they need to do, because it just reinforces it's now not only us saying it or talking to them about it, but this additional professional who does work in this area is also recommending that they look at those areas. So it's been tremendously beneficial for us, for sure.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, it's been a pleasure having you on, and we end each of our shows asking our guests the same final question. It's the one that our listeners hang on to hear about, because we all are all about joy on the Chemidlin Money Mindset, and that is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
Man, I hate that this is the answer because it's so cliche, but I worked out. I literally was walking home from the gym annoyed at how good I felt and how good of a mood I was in, because, I've been exercising for several years. When I was in high school, I weighed over 300 pounds. And so I discovered exercise sort of a little bit later in life. And boy, when I did, it was just so annoying how effective it was at improving my life. I'm like, damn it, all those annoying people were so right. So it's crazy. Tony Robbins always says whenever he is like just not feeling well, he just changes his state by changing, like getting his body active. It doesn't have to be going to the gym for an hour. Just move around. Dudes. And for me, my hack is like 10 jumping jacks. Like right now, I'm in the middle of a 6-hour back-to-back. And in between, I do 10 jumping jacks, and it's just like, ready to go. So not related to podcasting. Like I said, super annoying that it's true, but you just got to move.
Yeah. Listen, it's great. And I thank you for sharing that. It's not cliche because it's your joy. So it's personalized to you. So that's all that matters. So we're going to have all of your information in the show notes, Kevin. But if people want to connect with you, learn more about Grow the Show, what's the easiest and the best place for them to do that?
Yeah. So the first thing is they can go to 12daysofpodcastgrowth.com. So that's 12daysofpodcastgrowth.com. That is a email course that walks through the foundations of what to understand as a business owner if you want to make podcasting work for your business. So that's the first thing. Secondly, if you're hearing my voice right now, that means you're using a podcast app for you in most cases. And so if you just search for Grow the Show, and if it doesn't come up, search Grow the Show Kevin. You will come across the show. Every single episode is a lesson where you're going to learn something that's going to help you grow and monetize your show faster. So that would be what to do.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing the great takeaways that can be implemented today if you don't have a show, and if you do, that can make it better and grow your show, but grow the show for them. And I appreciate your time and enjoy your day.
All right, the pleasure's all mine. Thanks for having me.
Wow, what a powerhouse episode today. Kevin, your journey from software developer to podcasting mogul is nothing short of inspiring. The insights, strategies, and real talk you shared today are exactly what our listeners need to take their content, brand, and business to the next level. To everyone tuning in, this is your sign to go all in. Whether you're launching, growing, or scaling, the knowledge Kevin dropped today is the fuel to get you there. Kevin, thank you for bringing your expertise, your energy, and your passion. This conversation was next level. Kevin Chemidlin and Grow the Show can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes.
The opinions voiced in the Chemidlin Money Mindset Show with Lawrence Sprung are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy ensures success or protects against loss. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial or tax advisor prior to investing. Investment advisory services offered through CWM LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. Guests on the Chemidlin Money Mindset Show are not affiliated with CWM LLC.